King.
Mr Speaker, that was a very disappointing and superficial speech by the current member for Hamilton East. And I need to say to that member that he just needs to perhaps read a little more, open his eyes a little more, because Labor's economic policy, not only has it been costed and planned, it's been released 3 months before the election, so the public of New Zealand has an opportunity to see where our priorities are, how we will raise the money to pay for our policies, unlike the preview that we're going to receive just before the election from the National Party, where we already know they're not going to include all issues in it, that we're not going to get the clear picture. I challenge the member's office, are we going to have all the costs for the sleepovers, for example, or for carers? Is that going to be costed in the preview before the election? I suggest people have a look. It will not be there. You know, they take the old Muldoon approach to budgets, keep the people in the dark and feed them manure. This, Mr Speaker, is the last debate before the election, and it's a time to contrast 6 years of a National Act United Future Maori Party government coalition, a coalition of the confused and the unwilling, and can contrast that with the positive vision that Labor has for New Zealand come the 20th of September. And today, we've had to listen to the story of woe of what the National Party inherited when they became the government. Well, they're nothing more than crocodile tears, and if I could use the H word, I would. Because that very government, on December 2008, told the people of New Zealand that the economy in New Zealand had been left in such a state that we were in a good position for the rainy day. And the rainy day had arrived with the global financial crisis. Who said that, Mr Speaker? The Minister of Finance, Bill English. He went on then to appoint the former Finance Minister, one Sir Michael Cullen, to be the head of one of the biggest SOEs in New Zealand. So hopeless was Michael Cullen that he appointed him the chair of New Zealand Post. You see, we don't believe these sorts of stories from the National Party when they say how bad things were under Labor, because we remember the years in government when every year when we were trying to put away money into the Cullen Fund, set up KiwiSaver, bring in policies that New Zealanders want, they wanted tax cuts. Bill English said, got to give tax cuts. Well, if we had given tax cuts in those years, there would not have been funding for them to have money for the rainy day, because we paid down the debt, the government debt that this country had, and we left them with net government debt, net zero government debt when we left office. They were left in a position where they could manage a global financial crisis. Then they talk about the 10 years of deficit. Treasury predicted 10 years of deficits if nothing changed. Well, do they believe the 10 years of high unemployment that the Treasury, well, just a moment, Mr Woodhouse, has Treasury predicted 10 years of high unemployment under a national government? Did they not predict that just a few weeks ago? And the National Party, do you believe you're going to have 10 years of high unemployment if you were to be in power that long? Well, of course you don't. You're going to say there are things we're going to do. So if it's good enough for you to say that, it is good enough to say that under a Labor government we certainly had the ability to change our economy, and we had. You know, Mr Speaker, I have been an observer and a participant in this Parliament for quite a number of years, and I've had the opportunity to watch the progress of our party in power and their party in power. And I have to say, at times, there are some things that we have in common. You see, there does come a time when ministers who do work very hard and work long hours, separated from their families, where doors are open for them and due deference is given to them, where yes, minister is the response they get from most of their staff and the people around them, when ministers become impatient and frustrated because people criticise their hard work and don't understand the pressures they are under. And eventually that impatience and frustration turns to arrogance. the public see this government is out of touch and, in the case of some ministers, silly ministers, out to lunch. And that is the position that the key government has reached today. They have stopped listening to the people of New Zealand. They've stopped listening when they believe there is no problem with poverty in New Zealand, when they believe that it's all okay out there. It shows ministers have stopped knocking on doors, they've stopped listening to what the people say, and they're now into the zone, we know best. And we saw that sort of attitude from Jerry Brownlee, the Minister of Transport, just this last week. We see it with Nick Smith, with his arrogance towards the fish and game people. We saw it with Judith Collins, who didn't think that you needed to separate your private business from your ministerial activities. And we see it with Bill English rewriting history every day of the week about how bad things were and how great they are now. Well, let's just have a look at some of the facts and figures. We now have this National Party have clocked up $56 billion of debt since they became government. Now, some of that's going to be for Christchurch, obviously, but some of that, and we give that. We say that's right. But they've clocked up $56 billion of debt, and it's a debt that's costing New Zealanders $10 million a day. And the big losers under this government are the first home buyers. The house prices in Auckland have gone up 200,000 under a national government. And this is a party, the National Party, that thinks the only thing that matters is providing and achieving a surplus. Doesn't matter how you get there, doesn't matter how many smoke and mirrors you use to try and show you've achieved a purpose, you've achieved a surplus. What is important? Sure, getting a surplus, but it's also important that you invest in the things that really matter. And I want to mention health. Because health is in trouble, Mr. Speaker, in serious trouble under this government. And I'm going to use Treasury's own words. And they came out in the July papers after the budget, when they released their papers. When you see some of the truth, this is what Treasury says about health. We think the funding package provided is a very real challenge for DHBs. It's going to take a mix of salary restraint, efficiency and productivity improvements, and service reconfiguration. We all know what service reconfiguration is. They're saying the CPI is going to be up 2.2% for 2014-15. And Mr. Speaker, they say that they've advised the DHBs that the funding that they have received is for demographic purposes only, with a contribution, let me repeat that word, a contribution towards cost pressures. A contribution towards cost pressures. Well, so what did the DHBs get? Inflation to run at 2.2%. They've got pressures, cost pressures. What did they get? Well, only 3 of the DHBs got an increase in funding above 2.2%. And therefore 17 DHBs got less than the CPI in terms of their increase. They have faced, in net real terms, a 2.3% cut in their budget. And now it's starting to show. Last night, I was with members opposite, Scott Simpson, other members of the Health Committee, talking about mental health. 200 people there that provide mental health services. Did they think they've had a lot of money provided to them? Many of them have had no increase for 5 years in their NGO funding, and only 4 DHBs had passed on funding to the NGOs, and even then it was less than they paid themselves. We have got a mounting problem in health, and if it's not recognised by an incoming government led by Labour, where we have committed to additional funding in health to meet those cost pressures, then the people of New Zealand will find they don't get the health services they need, and already they are saying we are missing out. And when I get a moment, I'll just release how few people are getting orthopaedic surgery now compared to when we were in government.
I call Jamie Lee Ross.
Mr. Speaker, I remember when I was still at school